I drove 900 miles through a night of rain, carrying my mother's old wedding veil to give my daughter the day before her wedding. The door flew open. Rachel leaned aside to avoid me like a door-to-door seller. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming." Behind her, Derek, my daughter's fiancé, smirked. $58,000 is what buys you a spot on the list, Mrs. Evelyn. I smiled, unlocked my phone, and left. A moment later, 41 calls and 12 threatening texts came flooding in. "My name is Evelyn Hart, 72, born and raised in the suburbs of Ohio. I've been used to long roads and long trips since I was young, but that night's drive, nearly 900 miles straight, was different. I wasn't driving for vacation or to find a place to rest. I was driving on a mother's heart for my only child, Rachel. The wedding veil I brought wasn't anything fancy. It had turned ivory after decades in a wooden box. But to me, it was a symbol of love and endurance. On my wedding day to Rachel's father, my mother gave me that veil and said, "Real love isn't in the glitter, it's in choosing to stay and to sacrifice." When my marriage collapsed, the veil stayed, a silent witness to the years I raised my child alone. And now, I wanted to place it in Rachel's hands, the way my mother had placed it in mine. But when the door opened, instead of a warm hug, I got the distant eyes of my own daughter. She drew back, slipping out of my arms the way you dodge an uninvited guest. I could hear my heart crack into 100 pieces. I tried to smile, tried to believe she was just flustered by the surprise. Then Derek's voice came from behind her. Syrupy, with that tight smile I never trusted. $58,000 is what buys you a spot on the list, Mrs. Evelyn. I remember every word. They dropped like lead, turning that bright-lit porch cold. I stood frozen. Rachel lowered her head, fingers, fussing with the edge of her pink silk robe. No protest, no glance to shield her mother from her fiancé's rudeness. I had once hoped Derek would be a steady shoulder for my daughter. But all I saw then was a calculator, someone who priced people in dollars. Worse, Rachel, the child who sobbed in my arms when she lost her puppy at 10, stood silent while I was insulted on her doorstep. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I turned, unlocked my phone, and dialed the bank. The rep's even voice asked for a reason. I answered, short and clear. Fraud. Family fraud. Within minutes, $58,000 were frozen. I stepped down from the porch, my suitcase clattering over the brick path. Every step cut like a knife, but I felt oddly calm. Sliding into the car, I checked the rear view. Rachel still stood there like a statue, while Derek scowled, his phone buzzing nonstop in his hand. I started the engine and drove off to the drum of rain on the windshield. When I reached the hotel, it was close to 7 a.m. I've long been used to handling things alone, but I didn't expect at my age to still be learning a new lesson. Unconditional kindness can turn you into a walking wallet in some people's eyes. The front desk clerk smiled warmly, called me Mrs. Hart, and handed over the key to a suite with a garden view. That respect, even if I paid for it, warmed me far more than my own child's words. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming." I set the suitcase down, sank onto the sofa, and took out my phone. Missed calls filled the screen. Rachel, Derek, unknown numbers. I let them be, didn't pick up. I wanted them, for once, to feel what it's like to be left with nothing to hold on to, the way I had for decades. When my husband walked out, when I had to be both mother and father, when I pulled double shifts and no one asked how I was doing. By the 15th call, I shut the ringer off and left it on vibrate. 1 hour, 2, 3. By the time I checked, there were 41 missed calls. Texts stacked up, first pleading, then angry, then threatening. One from Rachel, "Mom, it has to be a bank mistake. Please call me." Another from Derek, "Evelyn, what game do you think you're playing? We've got hundreds of guests, fix it now." Then this, "Listen, old lady. If you don't unlock the funds, you'll regret it. Rachel's been crying all day. Is that what you want?" I read them all, saved them, took screenshots, and dropped them into a separate folder. I named it R58. For the first time in years, I felt strong. Instead of curling up to apologize, I chose silence and let them taste loss of control. I stood, pulled back the curtains, and looked out at the deep green garden in the early Sunday. A thought flashed by. Maybe I created a different Rachel, a Rachel who sees sacrifice as a given and her mother's money as a right, not as love. The thought hurt so much my chest tightened. But at the same time, a small flame lit. If I don't stop this now, I'll lose Rachel for good, not to Derek, but to my own indulgence. I poured a small drink from the minibar and took slow sips. It was bitter, but it went down easy. The phone kept buzzing. I still didn't answer. In my head, I saw the wedding veil lying in the suitcase. That gift hadn't been given yet, and maybe fate was saying I shouldn't give it to my daughter under these circumstances. Near noon, I decided to call Charlotte King, my longtime attorney. Charlotte helped me a decade ago on an investment fraud case when I almost lost the only home I had left. I trusted her. After I summarized what happened, Charlotte was quiet for a while, then asked, "Evelyn, are you sure you want to go all the way? Because once we start, there's no turning back." I drew a long breath and looked out at the sun flickering over the garden. I said, "Charlotte, I've been a good mother for too long. Now I need to be a clear-headed woman." That day I slept only an hour. In the short nap, I dreamed of 12-year-old Rachel crying over a failing math grade. I wiped her tears, hugged her, and said, "It's okay, honey. I'm here." The dream faded and the present rushed in. Now she was the one making me cry, and there was no "I'm here" coming from her to me. I shot upright, carrying both a deep sadness and a new strength. I knew the next days wouldn't be peaceful, but this time I was ready. Leaning back in the hotel's upholstered chair, I closed my eyes, and in that quiet the past rolled in like a storm. All the single mother years returned so clearly I could almost hear the factory horn, smell machine oil on my uniform, and hear little Rachel giggling in our cramped rental. My husband Mark left when Rachel was 8. On a freezing February morning, he left a folded note on the kitchen table, scrawled, "I need freedom. You're strong. You'll manage. Take care of our kid for me." That was it. No call to explain, no goodbye to a little girl who still smelled like kid's soap. I collapsed on the kitchen floor that day, sobbing until I couldn't breathe. But when Rachel peeked out in her pink cat pajamas and rubbed her eyes, asking, "Mom, where's Dad?" I wiped fast, swallowed the shaking, and smiled. "He's on a long work trip, but I'm here with you." I chose to carry the truth alone. From then on, I worked. Days at the corner store, nights cleaning offices until late. I remember those old shoes with the worn-out soles, every step on gravel. Some nights I opened the apartment door and heard Rachel whisper, "Mom, I'm still up." I set down a cheap fast food bag, hugged her tight, the smell of grease in my hair mixing with her baby soap. Our third-floor rental had walls thin enough to hear the neighbors fight, but to me and Rachel, it was a small world full of love. I hung her school drawings on the wall, our own little gallery. Every crinkled, glue-curled sheet was a badge I showed anyone who'd listen. I wasn't always strong. Many nights, after Rachel slept, I sat by the window with a stack of bills, streetlight leaking through old curtains. I wondered how long I could hold out. But the next morning, when Rachel ran to hug me, hair messy, dimples peeking, I found more strength. One memory stands out from her middle school years. At a parent meeting, the teacher said Rachel was bright and quick, but hid her feelings. I knew why she didn't want to make me sad by bringing up her dad. On the way home, I bought a little cake from the corner bakery. We lit a candle and sang For No Occasion. Rachel's eyes filled, and she whispered, "Mom, you're my hero." I bit my lip not to cry and said, "No." "Sweetheart, you're why I get to be a hero. I did everything so she wouldn't feel less than. I bought her prom dress with 2 months of extra shifts so she wouldn't feel out of place." I pinched pennies and sold my old wedding ring to pay her college tuition. I remember her crushing hug when the acceptance letter came. "Mom, we did it!" In that moment, every hardship felt worth it. But that unconditional love planted a seed of expectation. I didn't notice when Rachel began to assume I'd always fix things. Short on her first rent? I wrote a check. Old car broke down? I emptied the emergency fund. I told myself, just this once. Once became always. My biggest fear all those years was that Rachel would think love equals endless giving. I taught her she could lean on me, but I forgot to teach her she also had to stand on her own 2 feet. And now, standing by Derek on that threshold, eyes indifferent, I saw the cost of years of overgiving. Derek wasn't the first to drip poison in her ear. In college, a boyfriend once told her, "Your mom is too controlling." That night Rachel yelled at me for the first time, "You never let me be free." I cried quietly in my room, thinking I'd failed. A few months later she broke up with him and came back to apologize, and I thought we were fine. I didn't see Derek coming colder, more patient, more calculating. When she introduced Derek, he was polite, smooth, holding her hand like he'd never let go. I smiled, gave blessings, let him into my home. Then the gaps appeared. Fewer calls that came only to ask for things. One day, she said flatly, "Mom, Derek says I need to be more independent and not rely on you so much." It stabbed me, because independence is exactly what I'd spent years planting in her. But Derek flipped the words, recasting me as a burden, an obstacle. Tonight, sitting alone in the hotel, I really understood. For years I'd been the pillar, but forgot the fence. I gave too much and never taught her that a mother's love also deserves respect. Rachel forgot who I was not because she's cruel, but because I never taught her that even a mother's love needs honoring. I gripped the glass, feeling waves of memory crash in my chest. I remembered long shifts, hands swollen from washing stacks of dishes, pay stubs thin as a leaf that I folded and tucked under the mattress, praying to save enough for her schooling, winter nights when I gave her the only blanket and curled up in a thin coat. And now, after all that, my child looked at me like a stranger on her own porch. It hurt. But in that same moment, I realized those single mother years had forged something Rachel and Derek never expected: endurance and resolve. I had survived years carrying the sky alone. I wouldn't fall to one insult or a smug line. When I set the glass of wine down, my hand was trembling, but my eyes were clearer than ever. I knew that to pull Rachel out of Derek's arms, I needed more than love. I needed the wisdom and toughness that all those single mother years had forged in me. In the luxury hotel room, I listened to my heartbeat again, slow but steady. I looked back on everything, not to complain, but to remind myself, I've weathered so many storms, and I'll weather this one. If those years didn't break me, then a Derek certainly won't. Derek started off very cleverly, and that was exactly what made me uneasy. He never openly argued with me, never raised his voice. Everything came wrapped in gentle suggestions, so smooth that outsiders could mistake it for caring. I remember the night Rachel wore a pale green dress to dinner at my house. She'd loved that color since she was little because it reminded her of the garden where she used to play with me. Derek looked at her and smiled. "You look beautiful, but this color is a little washed out. Next time try red, you'll look brighter and stand out more." It sounded like a compliment, but I saw Rachel pause and glance at him as if waiting for approval. Then came the friends issue. Rachel had always been outgoing, with a tight group from college that met up often. One time, while we were chatting, Derek leaned over and whispered, "I think a few people in that group aren't good for you. They're a bit childish and don't fit where you're headed now." I saw Rachel go blank, then nod. Not long after, those familiar names disappeared from her conversations. When I asked, she just smiled. "I'm too busy, Mom." Even her calls to me weren't spared. At a dinner, he said slowly, "You should focus on us more. Call your mom less or you'll get pulled away." Rachel only smiled, but I watched her put her phone away, embarrassed. After that, the calls grew fewer and shorter, down to a few polite lines. "How are you, Mom?" "I'm busy. Let's talk later." I hung up each time with my chest hollow. I told myself not to be oversensitive. A daughter needs her own life. I'd repeated that to myself for years. Maybe I was overreacting, but every time I tried to think positive, a new detail cut into me. When we discussed wedding prep, I offered to help and suggested a few family-style touches. Derek gave a thin smile. "We've already got a team handling it. You just relax, no need to complicate things." His tone was even, not harsh, but final. Rachel sat beside him, lips pressed, offering no pushback. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Okay, I trust you too." Inside, I felt myself being pushed to the margins, like an uninvited guest. Once, Rachel called, excited, "Mom, we decided on a small, refined wedding, just the closest family." I was happy, thinking at least she wanted something warm and intimate. But a few weeks later, I heard about a guest list a mile long, Derek's co-workers, friends from everywhere, relatives on both sides. I searched my memory and didn't find myself on that list. Small and refined had been just words. What disappeared was me. At one of the rare dinners I was invited to, Derek lifted his glass, smiling smoothly. "There's really no need for you to worry. Just sign the transfer and we'll handle the rest." The words slid out, slick and clear, without a hint of shame. Rachel dropped her eyes, clenching the hem of her dress. I gave a social smile and nodded it off, but inside I went cold, as if I'd stepped into a freezer. Motherhood reduced to a number, a lifetime of love boiled down to a wire transfer. That night, back home, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop, logged into the bank, and went over every transaction. I saved every receipt and confirmation email into a new folder. I named it R58. Rachel, $58,000. Seeing that name made my eyes sting. It wasn't just money. It was a lifetime of patience and trust, now labeled by 3 short characters. From that day, I started a new habit. I kept a journal, but not the usual kind. I recorded every small change in Rachel. How she called less, how she dodged simple questions, how she repeated Derek's favorite phrases. Not necessary. Be more independent. Don't interfere. I wrote down dates and circumstances, carefully. Holding the pen, I didn't think I was building a case against anyone. I just wanted a record of the change. I feared that one day, when Rachel was completely unfamiliar to me, I'd need those pages to remind myself, my daughter used to be different, used to love me truly. But deep down, I sensed those lines would serve another purpose: proof, protection. I had no idea I was quietly preparing for the day I'd need them. I never imagined a tap on a phone screen could change a blood bond. But that morning, sitting in the car under a steady drizzle, I did exactly that. I opened the banking app, scrolled to the $58,000 transfer from 2 weeks earlier, my hand shaking but firm, and tapped, "Freeze transfer." The screen lit up, "Request successful." My heart pounded like I'd sprinted. Relief and bitterness rose at once. In that moment I knew. I was no longer the mother who only bowed and accepted. I had drawn a clear line between love and exploitation. I set the phone on the seat, started the engine, and let the rain tap a rhythm on the roof. The road ahead was blurry, but inside I felt brighter than ever. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Just 15 minutes later, the phone buzzed hard. "Rachel." I didn't pick up. A minute later, "Derek." I let it ring. 5 more minutes, an unknown number. I laughed, picturing Derek pacing and trying every phone he could to reach me. My whole life, I'd been the one who answered the second Rachel called. Now, I chose silence. The phone kept vibrating, the ring slicing through the car. I turned the sound off and left it on vibrate, but the seat still trembled like a reminder. Someone's scrambling to find you. I pressed the gas and headed for the Continental, the hotel I'd booked. As I checked in, the phone buzzed for the 13th time. The young clerk smiled and said, softly, "Enjoy your stay, Mrs. Hart." I nodded, feeling something strange. Here, people called me by my name and treated me with respect, while my own daughter had treated me like an ATM. I opened the door to the spacious suite, dropped my suitcase on the carpet, and sat on the sofa. The phone screen glowed red with missed calls. I counted slowly. By day's end, the number stopped at 41. There were 12 texts, too, shifting tone with each wave of panic. The first from Rachel, short, "Mom, it must be a mistake. Please call me." The second, also hers, "Mom, I need to talk right now. There's an issue with the account." By the third, Derek cut in, "Evelyn, what stunt are you pulling? Call back." Now, they got harsher as they went. "Mom, I'm begging you, don't do this to me." "Evelyn, stop being childish. Do you know how many people are counting on today?" And finally, the chilling one. "Old lady, if you don't unlock the money in 2 hours, you'll regret it. Rachel is crying because of you. Is that what you want?" I read every word, took screenshots, and dropped them into the R58 folder on my computer. My chest felt icy, but my resolve was solid. For years, I'd been the fixer, the worrier, the one rushing to find solutions. Now it was their turn to taste helplessness when things slipped out of their hands. That night I sat by the hotel window, looking down at the garden glowing warm gold. The red wine in my glass sparkled, and somehow it tasted sweeter than ever. Each buzz of the phone on the table was like a drumbeat, announcing the momentum turning. I pictured Rachel crying, Derek pacing, the two of them used to controlling me finally getting a taste of being controlled. A flicker of pity rose, but I snuffed it out. Pity would drag me back into the old spiral. I whispered, "Enough, Evelyn, enough." The next morning, I opened my phone and saw 7 more missed calls. What caught my eye was the change in tone. Rachel left a shaky message, "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know what Derek said yesterday. Can we talk?" But 10 minutes later, a text from Derek popped up. "Don't make me think you're deliberately sabotaging your daughter's happiness. You can't handle the consequences." I sat still, reading them over and over. The contrast between those voices made it clear who was really in control. Rachel still loved her mother, but Derek had turned that love into a tool. And I realized, if I responded now, all this effort would wash away. I filed every bank document, saved a backup to an external drive, and locked them in the room's safe. I wasn't just a hurt mother anymore. I was gearing up like a soldier going to war. That night I opened my small notebook and began to write, date, 41 calls, 12 texts. Pleading turned to threats, love turned to pressure, but I'm still here, quiet, listening to each buzz without moving. This is the first time I've let my daughter feel my absence. And I realize I'm not collapsing. I'm stronger than I thought. When I closed the notebook, my hand felt steadier. The garden lights faded and night covered everything, but inside me something lit up. The real fight had begun. I dozed off, and in the dream I saw 12-year-old Rachel sobbing in my arms over a bad grade and felt that tiny body shuddering, and now that hug no longer belongs to me. I knew I would have to see Rachel. After 2 days holed up in the hotel, listening to the phone buzz and never answering, a mother's heart can't stay locked forever. I didn't want my daughter to hear only Derek's voice. I needed to look her in the eye and finally say what I'd kept inside for years. I set one clear condition. If you want to see me, come alone. I emphasized, alone. Rachel was quiet on the line, then whispered, "Okay." I knew a part of her still wanted to listen to her mother, and I clung to that part like a strand of thread in the dark. The next afternoon, I sat in the Continental's lobby. Wide space, warm lights spilling over polished tile, heels clicking and suitcase wheels humming softly. I kept my breathing even, my hand closed around my small journal. Right on time, Rachel walked in. I recognized the swollen eyes, lashes trying to cover nights of crying. She wore the blue dress I gave her last year, the one I chose after weeks of saving just to see her smile. Seeing her in it now, my heart softened and ached at once. She hurried over and opened her arms. I stepped back half a foot and raised my hand gently. "Sit down, sweetheart. We need to talk like two adults." The air fell heavy. Rachel hesitated, then sat across from me. I looked straight at her, the 4 questions I'd forged over 2 days ready in my mind. I asked, "Who paid your elementary school tuition so you could attend a better school than our neighborhood offered?" Rachel murmured, "You, Mom." I continued, "Who worked 2 jobs so you had the same books and clothes as your friends?" Rachel nodded, eyes brimming. "You, Mom." I didn't blink and asked on, "Who gave up the blanket and stayed cold all winter when you were 13 so you could sleep warm?" Her voice caught, "You did." I lowered my voice, slow and steady. "Who sold her last wedding ring just to pay your college tuition?" She couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears spilled. "You did." I sat up straight and let the silence fall between us. Then I asked one last time, not loud but heavy enough to cut deep. "Do you need a receipt to love your mother, Rachel?" My daughter was silent. She looked down, fists gripping the hem of her blue dress. That silence hurt more than any denial. I could see Derek had planted so much calculation in her that even love was being weighed. I didn't want to let her slip away. I took out my phone, opened one of several savings accounts, showed her the balance for a second, then closed it. "I'm not showing off money. I'm reminding you what kindness weighs. Kindness isn't for bargaining, and it isn't supposed to be turned into a number on paper." Rachel exhaled. 2 thin lines of tears fell. I knew she was torn, but I had to go further. I told her, firm and clear, "Years ago, your father tried to make me leave you because he wanted an easier life. He said, 'Choose me or the child,' and I chose you. Do you think that kind of love needs an invoice?" Her tears fell harder, but this time my eyes were dry. I was clearer than I'd ever been. I looked right at her and spoke each word. "I'm giving you 24 hours. Either you respect me or you respect the man who wants to erase me from your life. Not deciding is also a decision." I stood, straightened my coat, and didn't reach to wipe her tears like I used to. My back was straight. My steps were steady. As I passed the table, I heard her choke out, "Mom!" But I didn't stop. I knew it was time for Rachel to face her own choice. Outside the hotel lobby, the late afternoon wind hit my face, chilly but sobering. I took a long breath and looked up at a sky turning amber. My heart felt heavy, but in that weight there was a small light. At least for the first time, I'd forced my daughter to think with her own heart, not with her mother's wallet. I couldn't sleep after that lobby meeting. Everything I'd said to Rachel kept replaying in my head, as clear as a ticking clock in a quiet room. I wondered whether she had the courage to think for herself, or if she'd run back to Derek. Near midnight there was a soft knock. I sprang up, walked to the door, heart racing. When it opened, Rachel stood there alone. Her eyes were still puffy, her shoulders trembling under the hallway light. I stepped aside, quietly letting her in. Rachel sat on the sofa, hands twisting together. It took a long moment before she spoke. "Mom, I have to be honest. Derek, he's always suggesting. At first I thought it was caring, but it kept growing. He told me not to wear long dresses, said they make me look old. He told me to talk less in crowds. Then he handed me a list of friends I should keep at a distance, because they don't fit the image he wants for me. I listened, my chest tight. I asked, calm but sharp, "Is that love or a leash?" Rachel went quiet. She stared at her hands, then whispered like a confession, "I don't hear my own voice anymore, Mom. A lot of times I want to speak, but I hear Derek in my head telling me not to, saying people will look down on me." I sat beside her and put a hand on her shoulder. "Close your eyes, Rachel. Picture the wedding you truly dreamed of as a kid, not anyone else's yours." She closed her eyes, her breathing slowed. Then, like a truthful child, she whispered, "Small, cozy. On a beach, with close family. I've never liked big parties. I just want the sound of waves and my loved ones laughing." I let that answer hang in the air, then asked, "Then why is it flashy and loud now?" Rachel opened her eyes, looked at me, then lowered her head. "Because Derek says it has to be. He says the bigger the wedding, the more it proves how happy we are. If not, people will think he's not good enough for me." I squeezed her hand and said firmly, "Happiness doesn't need an audience. If you need 100 strangers to believe you're happy, that isn't happiness, it's a performance," Rachel cried, but this time they were awakening tears. She leaned onto my shoulder and whispered, "Mom, I'm so tired. I can't tell what's love and what's control. Everything is a mess." I patted her back and murmured, "That's exactly when you redraw the line. Love makes you grow. Manipulation only tightens the noose." We talked late into the night, the room lit by a soft bedside lamp. Rachel told me small things. How Derek grabbed her phone and read all of her messages, how he scoffed when she wanted to invite a few close friends. I listened and filed away each detail but didn't interrupt. I just asked, "How did that make you feel?" Each time, her voice got quieter and truer. Slowly, I watched her face relax, like a mask she'd worn too long was finally coming off. A flicker of a smile touched her lips, then suddenly turned into a laugh. It was light and clear, the same as when she was little, running around the backyard in a floral dress I'd clumsily sewn. I sat still, listening, equal parts hurt and relieved. For years I thought that laugh was gone forever. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I heard my child's old laughter again. She's not a kid anymore, but at least that laugh proved a real part of Rachel was still alive, a part Derek hadn't stolen. When the clock neared 3 a.m., we fell quiet. Rachel rested her head on her arm, eyes heavy, and I sat beside her, gently pulling a blanket over her. I knew this was just a first step, but a door had opened. And with even a sliver of light, I believed I could pull my daughter back to herself. Morning sunlight slipped through the curtains onto Rachel's face as she slept on the sofa. Her eyelids were swollen, but her features looked calmer after our long talk. I sat at the table with a cold coffee, watching her as if a blink might make it all disappear. I knew last night was only the start, and the road ahead would be tougher. When Rachel opened her eyes, her look was hesitant. She asked in a hoarse voice, "Mom, if I call off the wedding, will you think I'm a failure?" I set the cup down and met her eyes. Failure isn't marrying or not marrying. Failure is knowing you're not happy and walking forward anyway just to please other people. Rachel sat up and held her head in both hands. She was shaking, but there was a new light in her eyes. She whispered, "I never thought I'd dare to cancel. I'm afraid, Derek. Will explode, afraid people will laugh, afraid I'll disappoint you again." I cut in. "Sweetheart, I've lived long enough to know life can't be decided by the crowd's gaze. The only person you have to face is the one in the mirror." The air felt heavy. I knew Rachel was wrestling with her own fear, but at least for the first time, she said it out loud. At noon, her phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. She looked at me, pleading. I nodded slightly. "Answer it. But this time, listen with your heart, not your fear." I sat across from her and watched quietly. Rachel picked up. Hello? Derek's growl came through the speaker. Where are you? Why was your phone off all night? Do you know how many rehearsals we still have today? Rachel gripped the phone tighter and took a deep breath. I'm with my mom. There was a pause on the other end. Then Derek lowered his voice, smooth as always. I get it. You still love your mom, but this wedding is ours. Don't let outsiders interfere. I saw Rachel press her lips together. Then, suddenly, her voice was clear. Outsiders? That's my mother. The words sliced through the invisible rope that had tied her for so long. Derek was silent for a few seconds, then raised his voice again. Rachel, calm down. Do you know how much we've spent? If we cancel now, we'll be a joke. Rachel trembled but didn't hang up. She looked at me, eyes asking for strength. I gave a tiny nod. And she said it, like dropping a weight she'd carried too long. If we have to get married to put on a show for people, I'd rather be laughed at than live a lifetime in a lie. Derek, the wedding stops here. The air thickened. I heard Derek shout on the other end, You'll regret this. You've ruined everything. Rachel ended the call, set the phone down, and gasped like she'd run a marathon. I wrapped my arms around her, not holding back this time. I heard her sob, not from fear, but from relief. That afternoon, we went together to the event planner's office. The manager's eyes widened when Rachel said, I'm canceling the wedding contract. She frowned and talked about deposits and losses. Rachel squeezed my hand, her voice shaky but firm. I accept losing the deposit. I do not accept losing myself. I was proud to the point of tears. That was my daughter, not Derek's puppet. We signed the cancellation papers. I looked at Rachel's signature, shaky but resolute, and remembered when she learned to write her name in first grade, wobbly but proud. Today, that signature wasn't just her name. It was a declaration of freedom. That evening, when we returned to the hotel, Rachel sat silently by the window for hours. The city below still blazed with lights, people rushing everywhere. She said softly, Mom, I'm afraid that when I wake up tomorrow, I'll waver. I'm scared Derek will show up and I'll cave. I held her hand. You're not alone. I'm here. And even if one day I'm gone, you've learned this. Real happiness doesn't need an audience. Rachel turned to me, eyes red but brighter than ever. She smiled a little, tired and relieved at once. Mom, thank you. This might be the first time in years I truly feel awake. The next day, news of the cancellation spread quickly among relatives and friends. Rachel's phone rang nonstop again, this time with whispers and blame. A few friends scolded, Are you crazy? So many people were waiting for the wedding of the century. But Rachel simply answered, A wedding isn't to please them, it's to live the rest of my life with myself. I stood beside her and didn't step in. I wanted her to stand on her own 2 feet, and for the first time, I saw her truly do it. That night, as we sat in the room, Rachel took the wedding veil I had brought out of her suitcase. She stroked the thin fabric, eyes glistening. Mom, I don't think I'm ready to wear it. But someday, when I find someone who truly respects me, I'll put this veil on. And when that day comes, I want you there. I squeezed her hand, tears hot on my face. Sweetheart, that's the real dream I've always had for you. In that moment, I knew I hadn't driven 900 miles for nothing. I had brought not just a veil, but a mirror for Rachel to see herself. The wedding could be canceled, but her life had just been saved. The news of the cancellation spread faster than a storm. After a single night, Rachel's social pages were flooded with whispers, questions, even mockery. But what didn't surprise me was Derek's first move. He wouldn't stay quiet. Just hours after Rachel officially canceled with the planner, Derek posted a long piece on his page, opening with his familiar victim tone. After 3 years together, I'm devastated that the woman I love canceled the wedding just one day before the big moment. The reason? The selfish interference of a mother who can't let go. Below were hundreds of shares, many people sympathizing with Derek. Someone commented, "Poor guy." All that preparation ruined because the future mother-in-law doesn't know her place. I read every word, heat rising in my chest, but I didn't respond. I knew this wasn't the place for knee-jerk emotion. Rachel was different. She skimmed it, face pale. "Mom, I can't take this. He's turning me into a heartless villain." I put a hand on her shoulder and said firmly, "This is when you learn to let the truth protect itself." I kept all the evidence. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new social account. The profile photo was a picture of me in the hotel room, neat clothes, a calm face. I didn't choose anything tearful or angry. I wanted people to see a 71-year-old woman, composed but unyielding. My first post was short. "My name is Evelyn. Yesterday, my daughter canceled her wedding. People say I interfered and destroyed it. Here is the true story. I'll show the evidence, step by step." I attached a photo of the receipt for $58,000, clear proof that I paid for the wedding Derek now calls the shared dream of two young people. Within an hour, hundreds of comments poured in. People were no longer hearing just one side. Many women wrote, "Please keep telling it, we want to hear." Some men admitted, "If I were her parent, I wouldn't stay silent either." Rachel sat beside me, worried and surprised. She asked quietly, "Mom, are you sure? If you wade into this, you'll be attacked a lot." I smiled. "Honey, I've lived an entire life as a single mother. A few nasty comments online can't break me, but staying silent could break you." In the second post, I shared the messages Derek sent me when the money was frozen. He started sweet. "Mrs. Evelyn, it must be a small glitch. Please unlock it so we can relax." Then it turned to threats. "If you don't fix this in 2 hours, you'll regret it. Don't make me treat you like an enemy." I added one line, "This is how a man speaks to his fiancée's mother." That post spread like wildfire. The comments flooded in. "He only wants the money." "Disgustingly disrespectful to an older woman." "Rachel, wake up, he's a controller." Rachel read, eyes misting, "Mom, I never realized the truth could be this powerful." But Derek wouldn't give up. The next morning he posted a video, voice shaky as if the whole world had turned on him. He said, "I truly love Rachel, but her mother turned this into a money deal. I proposed to Rachel, not to Mrs. Evelyn's wallet. Outsiders who didn't know might believe him, but I was ready." That evening, I released the final piece of evidence, an audio clip I'd saved from a dinner a few weeks back. In it, Derek said casually, "Rachel, just let your mom sign. We need the money. It's not like we're ficted, asking a stranger. If she wants front row seats, consider it buying a ticket." I wrote, "This is how love turns into commerce. I don't need anyone's pity. I just need the truth to be seen." This time, there was nowhere for him to hide. Comments exploded. His own words expose him. "This mother didn't destroy anything, she exposed it." "Rachel, be grateful you got out in time." Rachel sat next to me, hands trembling as she scrolled. Then she turned and hugged me tight. "Mom, I let him build a wall between us for too long. Now I see you're not just my safety net, you're the only one who dared to fight for me." I patted her back. "No, Rachel. You made the decision. If you hadn't said stop last night, all my evidence wouldn't have saved you." After 3 days, the tide turned. Derek tried a few more posts, but each one was shot down by the community. A stranger messaged me. "Mrs. Evelyn, I dated Derek before. He controlled me and made me cut off my family." "When I saw your story, I knew I wasn't alone." I replied, "Thank you for your courage. The truth needs voices like yours." And just as I expected, 2 more than 3 women spoke up with the same pattern: isolation, control, disrespect. Derek's mask was gone. In the hotel room, Rachel and I watched the news stream roll by on the screen. She whispered, "Mom, I was scared at first, but now I understand. Silence is the most dangerous weapon of the cruel." I was silent for too long. I smiled, lighter than I'd felt in ages. "You learned the most important thing. Your own voice." That night I wrote one last post. I'm not fighting to defeat Derek. I'm fighting to get my daughter back. And to remind every woman, love must never come with threats or conditions. Happiness doesn't need an audience, and it certainly doesn't need a receipt. The post drew tens of thousands of shares, but what moved me most wasn't the number, it was the private messages from strangers. "Thank you. Your story helped me leave a toxic relationship." Rachel read with me, tears dropping onto the keyboard. "Mom, I'm not just free. I feel like I can help others." When I shut the laptop, the room fell quiet. I listened to Rachel's steady breathing, more peaceful than in days. Outside, the online battlefield was still noisy, but in my heart, a rare calm had returned. I knew the fight wasn't entirely over, but we'd taken the most important step. We reclaimed the truth, our voices, and ourselves. When two of Derek's exes went public about being isolated from their families, social media seemed to explode. Pieces that once felt scattered clicked into a clear picture. Derek wasn't a victim, he was a repeat offender with the same playbook. I read each account, angry for them, and aching inside. I knew how much courage it takes to show old wounds to a crowd. From those testimonies, an unexpected wave spread. People started using a simple, powerful tag: number set boundaries. At first, just a few older women used it to share about tone-deaf sons-in-law or distant daughters, but in a single night, it became a movement. Mothers, young women, even men who'd been controlled in marriages joined in. The comment section under my post turned into a kind of forum, some telling, some listening, some understanding. A young woman wrote, "Mrs. Evelyn, because of your story, I realized my boyfriend is pushing me to cut off my mom. I won't be silent anymore." Another mom left a shaky line. "My son once called me a burden. Reading your post, I see I'm not the only one." I watched the flow, not with triumphant joy, but with a deep sadness. Every comment, every hashtag was someone's scar. The world is big, and yet so many hearts are bound by the same kind of cage. I knew public waves cut both ways. On one hand, they protect the truth. On the other, they can turn everything into endless noise. I didn't want our story to become clickbait. So the next morning, I called Charlotte, a mid-career attorney I'd known for years. Charlotte is known for her calm. I summarized everything, and she agreed at once. "Let me act as your media contact. Evelyn, you don't have to argue with anyone. Let the evidence speak." From that day, I stopped replying directly to comments. Whenever Derek tossed out a new accusation, Charlotte posted exactly one photo or one file in response. No commentary, no harsh words. That stance made people trust more clearly. Someone honest doesn't need to grandstand. Meanwhile, Derek started losing his balance. He couldn't stand being sidelined. His posts grew more frantic, his tone sliding from pleading to spiteful. Once he even typed, "Rachel is nothing without me. Mrs. Evelyn ruined her daughter's life." But instead of earning sympathy, he only made his true nature show. People clipped that line and shared it everywhere with captions like, "Is this what love looks like?" A man who talks about his fiancée like that is terrifying. Rachel saw it, face drained. She said with a tremble, "Mom, I can't believe he could write that." I just sighed. When people lose control, their true selves show. Treat this as proof, not a wound. To avoid getting dragged in, Charlotte advised Rachel to block all personal contact with Derek. And Rachel did, without the old hesitation. Derek's number went straight to the block list. The screaming texts stopped piling up on Rachel's phone. From now on, any communication, if any, would go through the law office's official email. That not only shielded Rachel from Derek's sudden rages, it put the entire matter on clear legal ground. I saw my daughter's shoulders lighten, as if she'd dropped a sack of stones. One quiet evening, while we sat in the hotel room, Rachel suddenly asked, "Mom, are we winning?" I looked at her for a long time, then answered slowly, "Honey, don't think in wins and losses. Our goal isn't to make Derek lose, it's to bring the truth to light. You don't need noise. You only need the truth." I saw Rachel's eyes brighten. She nodded and whispered, "That's right. Happiness doesn't need an audience, and the truth doesn't need to shout." I knew that night my daughter had taken a long step on the road back to herself. From that day on, I hardly had to step in directly. The number set boundaries wave kept spreading, but instead of chaos, it became a place where many people found courage. Charlotte handled every public attack. Rachel learned to be silent before answering, no more rushing. As for me, for the first time in months, I could sip tea without my heart racing. The fight wasn't over, but the balance had tipped. Not because of noise, but because piece by piece, small truths were being arranged into a whole picture. The next morning, I sat with Charlotte King in her brightly lit law office. Piles of thick files lay neatly on the table. A blue fountain pen rested in front of me, its nib gleaming under the ceiling lights. The smell of fresh paper and toner hung in the air, mixing with the coffee Charlotte had just poured. This wasn't just legal procedure, it was a turning point for my life and Rachel's. Charlotte spoke slowly, every word clear. "Evelyn, you've thought this through. Once you sign, this becomes a legal will with binding terms." I nodded, at peace. I've waited a long time for this moment. Page by page, I signed without my hand shaking. The new will wasn't just about dividing assets, it was the message I'm leaving behind. No one is allowed to use my money to buy the approval of any man. That condition is written into Rachel's trust. Funds will be released only for education, investments, or choices that build an independent life, absolutely not to hold on to or buy love. I also set aside a specific amount to pay vendors tied to the canceled wedding. They did nothing wrong, and I don't want anyone losing their work because of Derek's greed. The rest, I placed into a new scholarship fund. I gave it a simple, meaningful name: Boundaries. It will support young women who dare to set lines in love and in life. Charlotte smiled, eyes full of respect. "You didn't just rewrite a will, Evelyn. You're rewriting how people think about motherhood and freedom." I smiled back. "I just want Rachel and other girls to know that kindness needs a fence." That afternoon, I called Marcus Reed, an old friend from a book club I once joined. For years, Marcus would remind me, "Evelyn, keep a boundary around your kindness, or people will build a house on it." I never forgot that line. I just brushed it aside, thinking love didn't need conditions. Now I understood he was right. An hour later, Marcus arrived at the hotel with a bouquet of white daisies. He walked into the lobby calm and gentle. When he saw Rachel, he gave a proper nod. "Nice to meet you, Rachel." My daughter looked a bit flustered, but I caught a flicker of relief in her eyes. No possessive handshake, no forced smile, just respect. Watching that scene soothed me. For years I'd let others wedge themselves between me and my daughter. Derek was the prime example, always trying to erase me from the picture. From this moment on, I made a promise. No one stands between me and Rachel. That's the first rule I rebuilt in my life. In the days that followed, I spent time teaching Rachel the small but essential things. I sat with her and showed her how to manage bank accounts, explaining each line on the statements. I handed her a sample contract and read it with her clause by clause, stopping at the usual traps. Read slowly, and when your heart starts racing, stop, breathe, and ask, "Am I signing for me or for my fear?" Rachel listened closely, nodding now and then. The constant confusion in her eyes was gone. What I saw was someone learning to take the wheel of her life. We also practiced saying, "No." I ran little role plays. I pretended to be Derek, offering something slick. Rachel took a deep breath and answered firmly, "No, this doesn't align with what I want." I nodded. "See? You said no, stayed calm, and kept your self-respect." At night, we opened old photo albums, each picture like a doorway back in time. There was one of Rachel at the park, holding an ice cream, grinning wide. Another from her 16th birthday, clutching a small gift I'd saved for all month. I hadn't seen that smile in real life for a long time, but tonight, when she laughed at her old awkward haircut, I knew that smile was coming back. I said softly, "See? We once had days when love was just a hug and a smile. No contracts, no receipts, no judging eyes." Rachel leaned on my shoulder and whispered, "Mom, I forgot how that felt. But now, I want it back." Before bed, I texted Rachel a short line what I wanted engraved in her heart. Independence isn't separating from your mother, it's standing strong beside her without leaning on anyone else. When she read it, she looked up with wet eyes but a steady gaze. She nodded and smiled faintly. I knew the daughter who once let someone else hold the reins was starting to balance herself, and to me, that was the real victory. The backlash against Derek seemed like it should have been enough to make him quiet, but I know people don't change overnight. Sure enough, a few days later he popped back up online playing the miserable victim. He posted a short video, voice choked, claiming he'd been sabotaged by a selfish future mother-in-law, saying he just wanted a happy family, but that old, selfish woman wouldn't allow it. I felt both amused and pitying. The victim move wasn't new, but it's dangerous. It can sway those who don't know the full truth. Charlotte didn't hesitate. That same day, she drafted a formal legal notice with signatures and certification sent directly to Derek and the platform where he posted. The message was crystal clear: remove all defamatory content and post a public apology. Charlotte read it to me before sending her voice even and firm. "We have concrete, time-stamped evidence. If Mr. Derek doesn't comply, we'll file a civil suit for defamation." I sat quietly, feeling lighter. This wasn't an emotional fight anymore. The law was stepping in. To reinforce the truth, at the same time, 2 more of Derek's exes shared their experiences. Their stories followed almost the same pattern. Sweet at first, then control, isolation, and financial dependence. One wrote bluntly, "If I hadn't read Evelyn and Rachel's story, I would have thought it was just me." Social media stitched together the scattered pieces into a whole, revealing Derek's real face. It didn't stop there. Derek's employer, an advertising and events firm, reached out directly to Charlotte to verify the claims. I remember exactly when Charlotte told me. She asked, "Do you want me to provide all the evidence?" I sat a moment, then said, "Send what's necessary. I don't want them to punish him, I just want him to learn boundaries." It sounded calm, but honestly, I only wished he'd stop ruining other lives. Results came fast. Derek was suspended that week. 2 weeks later, he officially left the job with a reputation beyond repair. I heard it from Charlotte, no gloating, no regret. To me, it was simply the natural consequence of his actions. But Derek wouldn't quit. He tried to reach out through back channels, even sent handwritten letters. The message was always the same: push for reconciliation and hint at a deal. If Rachel and I took down the posts, he'd let it go. Charlotte just gave a cool smile and sent back the entire file of notarized, time-stamped evidence. She added one line, "There is nothing to negotiate." This time, Derek went quiet. What moved me most wasn't his downfall, it was how Rachel handled it. For the first time, she sat at the table, opened her laptop, and wrote a long email to Derek. I sat behind her, didn't interfere, just watched. She wrote plainly, "I am formally ending all relationships with you, personal and legal. Do not contact me again. Any further action will go through my attorney." Her tone didn't shake, didn't beg, it was concise and clear. I looked at my daughter, proud and teary. For years I spoke and fought for her. Now she was writing her own declaration. I didn't change a word, just laid a hand on her shoulder. "You did very well," I said. "I'm here, but you stood tall." Rachel looked up, eyes steadier than ever. After that email, there was silence. No more rapid-fire calls, no more threats. At first the emptiness felt heavy, like a big room, with all the sound sucked out. But day by day we realized that silence was a gift. Everything grew lighter, like a breeze through an open window. The town moved on too. People are curious, but life keeps going. They talked about the fall fair, the local team, gas prices, and Rachel and we turned the page. One morning, I met Marcus at a small cafe by the lake, a place I'd rarely lingered before because my mind was too heavy. Marcus arrived, calm as ever, and set a cappuccino in front of me. I looked out at the sunlight on the water, then turned back and said, "Slow but sure, I'm tired, Marcus, but I'm free." He smiled, said nothing more, just nodded gently. In that moment, I felt my words were for him, for me, and for anyone who's ever been lost in a toxic relationship. I was tired, but I was free. And freedom, after all, is worth more than any wedding, any look, any praise or blame in the world. 6 months had passed since everything calmed down, and I realized time has a healing power no medicine can match. Rachel slowly rebuilt her life, one small but solid brick at a time. She got a job at an interior design firm where coworkers valued her creativity more than looks or connections. I remember late evenings when my phone pinged. The text was just one line, "Mom, have you had dinner?" But to me, it was a quiet promise that my daughter was relearning how to care. Each line, however short, felt like a steady heartbeat, reminding me the distance between us was closing. Rachel also began to open up. She said there was a new coworker, a simple, no-frills man. Before inviting her anywhere, he always asked one small question: "How's your mom?" It might sound ordinary, but to me, that question mattered more than any bouquet or gift. Only someone who truly pays attention remembers that love isn't just two people, it's each other's worlds. I saw Rachel's eyes when she mentioned him, bright and calm, so different from the anxious look she had beside Derek. As for me, I gave myself a chance too. On weekends, I accepted Marcus Reed's invitations to go on picnics. He brought an old camera, and whenever we found a patch of good sunlight in the pines, Marcus always gave me the best spot. He patiently adjusted the lens, making sure the light fell just right on my face. No sweet talk, no vows. Those small actions told me enough. Real love is usually quiet, no need to prove, no audience required. One evening, Rachel said she wanted to meet Marcus. I hesitated, worried about the generation gap, worried that old pain might still haunt her. But that night turned out nothing like my fears. We sat in a warm kitchen, the soft yellow light like a fireplace after a storm. Rachel poured tea for Marcus. He shared a few memories from our book club, his voice calm. Rachel listened closely. No awkwardness, just stillness and peace. As we cleared the table, Rachel suddenly turned to me, her voice teary but firm. "I get it now, Mom. Love means adding someone by your side, not subtracting your family." I went still a few seconds, then laughed through tears. And love never asks for a receipt. The three of us laughed. The sound wasn't heavy or broken. It spread like music, touching every corner of the room. In the days that followed, my daughter and I focused on finishing the Boundaries Fund. We held small gatherings and invited people with lived experience to share how they overcame control and emotional abuse. I watched Rachel take careful notes, as if she was learning not just for herself but to pass it on. We also launched a basic finance class for young women: how to read contracts, open their own accounts, set bank passwords. The image that stays with me is Rachel sitting beside a girl, not yet 20, patiently walking her through each step on a phone screen. Remember, this password is yours. Don't share it with a boyfriend. Don't let anyone control it. I stood at a distance, my heart suddenly lighter. I could feel myself growing older, and I felt happy. My daughter hadn't just been freed, she had become someone who could pass the torch to the next generation. On the small table that once sat in the hotel room, now back in my home, one thing still rests: my mother's wedding veil. I had it cleaned, folded neatly, and placed in a glass box. It lies there, no longer something to wave around to buy a seat at a wrong wedding. It lies still, a promise for the day when the right person and right love arrive, and Rachel will wear it. And that time, I will be there not as an outsider, but as the irreplaceable root of her life. I looked at the veil and smiled. The past was stormy, the present is calm, and the future is wide open. We learned how to love again, love without losing ourselves, love without control, love without proof. Maybe that's the most important lesson a lifetime of mothering can pass to a daughter. One crisp fall morning, I went back to the little beach, where Rachel and I used to walk. The sand was still soft, the waves still murmured against the shore like years ago, only my heart had changed. This was where I once dreamed of a tiny wedding, just truly close family, nothing fussy or showy. I returned not to plan anything, but to sit, exhale, and write a few lines for myself. I opened my worn leather notebook to a blank page. My hand trembled slightly, but wrote firmly. Boundaries don't ruin love, boundaries protect it. It took me many years to understand that. Love doesn't mean letting people walk over you. Love doesn't mean gritting your teeth through pain and measuring worth by sacrifice. Love is complete only when it has boundaries like the shoreline holding the waves in check, keeping them from washing everything away. I watched the whitecaps and thought about the road behind me. I don't regret driving 900 miles through the night with my mother's veil for Rachel. I don't regret freezing $58,000 and facing dozens of threatening calls. I regret only one thing, that I learned to say no too late. If I'd been brave a little sooner, maybe I could have spared Rachel some pain. Then I reminded myself, life doesn't let us walk backward, only forward. Moving forward means being grateful, even for lessons that arrive late. Rachel appeared behind me and wrapped an arm over my shoulder. The warmth of her hand made the sea breeze feel gentler. She whispered, as if speaking with the waves, "You saved me from a lifetime of proving myself." I turned and saw no more trembling in her eyes, only certainty. I smiled and answered, "You saved yourself, Rachel. I just turned on the light." I wanted her to know real strength isn't money or the steps I took for her, it's the courage she found inside herself. The wind picked up, salty air stinging my eyes. I sat there thinking about other mothers in this world. How many are standing on the porch of their own lives, letting kids, husbands, and strangers decide for them? How many have stayed quiet out of fear, believing sacrifice is mandatory? I wish they could hear this. If you need a sign to turn inward and step back into the center of your own home, this is it. I know I'm not alone in this journey. And I know that because of you, the ones who stayed with me through this whole story. Every view and every warm comment feels like a hand holding mine and Rachel's, reminding us we're not alone. Tell me, where are you listening from? I want to picture the streets and homes where my voice reaches. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what boundary once saved you from something? Your words might be the light switch for someone lost out there. I treasure every second you gave me. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for restoring my faith that a 70-something woman's voice can still move people. See you in the next story where we keep learning to love without losing ourselves, and remember that sometimes boundaries are the greatest gift we can give to ourselves and to the ones we love. My husband coldly announced to the board of directors, "You're fired. Take this old laptop and get out of my company." That sentence erased 40 years of my youth sacrificed by his side to build the million-dollar empire we have today. Next to him, the secretary-turned-mistress smiled smugly and laid her hand on his shoulder like she was the new lady of the house. I choked up and swallowed my tears. Moments later, security threw me out the door along with the beat-up laptop they mockingly handed back. But they had no idea that in just 10 minutes, the passcode I'd planted on that laptop would bring their million-dollar empire crashing down in front of them. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I am Margaret Hill, 66 years old. 40 years ago, my husband and I built NextCore from a tiny apartment with just 2 plastic chairs and 1 old computer. I'm the software engineer, the brain behind the system, and he's the one who went out into the world to persuade clients. For decades, I lived in the shadows, believing everything we did was 50-50. But now, looking back, I see I've been reduced to a faint shadow behind him, pushed out of the light by the very man I trusted completely. I stood still in the long hallway, the pale neon lights reflecting my face on the glass wall. Vanessa's high heels clicked behind me, mixed with a soft, mocking laugh. The board sat in silence. Not one person spoke up for me. A few had once been friends, had shared those brutal startup days with me, and now they only bowed their heads to the table as if my presence was an annoyance. I held the laptop in my hands, the keys worn shiny from tens of thousands of hours of coding, the very lines I wrote to protect hundreds of American companies from cyber attacks, and now it was handed back to me like trash. I heard Thomas whisper to Vanessa, "It's done. From now on you'll run NextCore with me." His voice was dry and cold, nothing like the man who once held my hand in a musty Seattle apartment 4 decades ago and promised to walk with me to the end of life. 2 security guards closed in. One said, "Mrs. Hill, this way, please." I swallowed hard, not wanting them to see me cry. I strode out with my head high, as if I were the one choosing to leave. The glass door shut behind me, leaving me alone in the crisp wind of an October morning in Boston. I took a deep breath. Inside, I burned and ached, like someone was crushing my heart in their fist. I gave up my youth, my dreams, my own career to build NextCore with Thomas. I sat night after night in a cramped kitchen, writing line after line of code while he met with investors. I stood by him through the lean years, when we couldn't afford a bed and slept on a mattress on the floor. And today, after 40 years, he wiped it all away with one sentence: "You're fired." I sat on the cold stone steps outside the NextCore building, clutching the laptop to my chest. People passed by, glancing at me, a 66-year-old woman in a business suit, face pale but eyes still blazing. No one knew that inside this old machine was the weapon I'd spent months preparing. 10 minutes. Just 10 more minutes and the code I planted would start running. It wouldn't destroy data or endanger clients, but it would expose the truth that I alone held the security keys. It would turn everything Thomas and Vanessa bragged about into ashes. I remembered Vanessa's look when she put her hand on my husband's shoulder, triumphant, like she'd won a dirty game. They thought I would cry, beg, and walk away a loser. But they forgot I'm the one who wrote NextCore's brain. Without me, this empire is a sandcastle waiting for the tide. The church tower bell nearby rang. 1, 2, 3. My heartbeat matched it. I opened my purse and glanced at my phone screen. The countdown was running. 9 minutes and 13 seconds left. I closed my eyes and let the memories flood in. Back to an autumn morning in 1985, when Thomas and I sat in a small cafe in downtown Seattle, plotting a crazy idea, a system that could predict and stop cyber attacks. People laughed and said we were just a dreamy couple. But I believed in my mind, and Thomas believed in his gift of persuasion. Every line of code, every design, every draft contract bore our mark. I lived my whole life for that dream. And now I was being tossed aside like an old thing. The wind picked up, red maple leaves scattering around the steps. I pulled my coat tighter and looked up at the 15th floor, where the board still sat in that glass room. By now, Thomas was likely lifting a coffee with Vanessa, certain they had erased me for good. I smiled faintly. They didn't know that my hands were the ones holding their fate. I inhaled again, my hands trembling but my eyes sharp. In a few minutes, NextCore, my brainchild, would show the world who truly held power, and when it did, Thomas, Vanessa, and the entire board would face the bare truth. They betrayed the wrong person. I remembered clearly those first days in a shabby rented apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. A one-bedroom, creaky hardwood floors, and a kitchen corner too small for a proper table. We had one old computer with a thick monitor, slow as a snail, and yet it became the heart of our dream. By day, I worked part-time at a small bookstore to pay rent. By night, I sat on the floor among piles of sketch paper and diagrams, typing line after line of code. On the table sat a cold cup of coffee, next to a half-eaten packet of instant noodles. Some nights I worked until the sun pushed through the window, my hands so sore I could barely lift them, but I still squeezed in one more line. Thomas, brimming with the energy of 30, wasn't good at programming but could sell ice to an Eskimo. He knocked on doors everywhere, offices, cafes, where young investors met to pitch the idea we believed could change tech, a system that predicted vulnerabilities before hackers struck. Not just blocking or patching, but seeing the risk before it happened. At first, everyone laughed. Some patted Thomas on the shoulder and called it far-fetched, saying no algorithm could predict cyber attacks. But he came home, saw me grinding away at that old machine, and said, "Keep writing, Margaret. I'll make them listen." So I wrote, and wrote without stopping. The code piled up, bugs appeared and vanished. I fixed, tested, failed, and started again. The tiny apartment smelled of coffee. The keyboard clacked under the constant drizzle of Seattle rain. Sometimes we fell asleep on the floor and woke with aching backs, then smiled at each other. One day, it'll all be worth it. When the first prototype finally ran, Thomas hugged me, eyes shining. "We did it, Margaret, you're a genius." I smiled, sweat still on my brow. In that moment, the toil melted away. We got married just as the first product launched. No lavish dress, no grand aisle. I bought a simple white dress online for $200. We went to City Hall on a Tuesday afternoon, signed the papers, then celebrated with pizza at a hole in the wall. Thomas took my hand, eyes sincere. "We're 50-50 in work and in life. I promise." That promise guided me for years. I believed him. I believed we were one, inseparable. The company grew. We moved from the apartment to a cheap room in an old warehouse. Paint peeled on the walls, exposed pipes, concrete floors, yet it felt like a palace. I set up the servers in a corner, ran cables everywhere, and Thomas put up a whiteboard with a goal: $1 million in contracts within 2 years. When we signed our first small deal with a local insurance company, we hugged and cried right there. It was only a few $1,000s, but it proved the dream was real. The years that followed were golden. I worked 18 hours a day, writing hundreds of thousands of lines of code, building new algorithms. Thomas crisscrossed the country to meet clients, raise funds, and pitch to investment committees. Sometimes he came home late, exhausted, but still held me and whispered, "We're winning, Margaret." Our love was tied to the work. I remember our 5th anniversary when we skipped a fancy restaurant and ate cup noodles in the office. The neon flickered, but Thomas poured me a cheap glass of wine and said, "This is the most romantic dinner of my life." I laughed, raised my glass, believing our love was unbreakable. We hired more staff and moved to a larger building. Then came the fateful day, our first $1 million contract. A major financial group agreed to use our system. I still see Thomas bursting into the office, face flushed with joy, holding the contract high like a championship trophy. Staff applauded, and I stood still, tears of pride falling. In that bright glow of success, my love for Thomas deepened. I thought this was every couple's dream: build together, win together, stand together at the top. I had no idea that the old 50-50 promise would be betrayed so cruelly. In the early years, during staff meetings, Thomas and I sat side by side and shared duties. I explained the tech. He handled finance and strategy. We were two halves of a song, in perfect rhythm, but slowly, the tune fell out of sync. I remember a Monday morning meeting. I was presenting a new algorithm diagram, explaining how it could detect vulnerabilities in real time. Eyes were on me, but before I could finish, Thomas cut in. "Let me translate that so it's easier to follow," he said with a thin smile. He rephrased what I'd just said in simpler terms, sometimes twisting the technical meaning. The room chuckled as if he'd told a joke. I sat there, gripping my pen, feeling like a teacher out of place in her own classroom. At first, I thought it was just thoughtless, but it became a habit. Every time I started to speak, Thomas would jump in, stressing that, "Margaret is brilliant, but let me explain it in a way that's easier to digest." Gradually, I noticed the board's eyes on me had changed. No longer full respect, more like half patient, waiting for Thomas to translate. I spoke to him privately more than once. "You don't need to cut me off," I reminded him. "I can be clear on my own." He slung an arm around me and smirked. "I'm just helping. You're smart, but sometimes too detailed. People need the big picture, not a bunch of tangled code." That cut deep. Weren't those tangled lines of code the company's soul? Without them, what was there to brag about? But Thomas had gotten used to being the talker, and I was pushed back into being the doer. I felt it even more in client presentations. At first, we stood together. I ran the demo, he persuaded. Then I turned into a prop. At a meeting with a big bank, I spent a week preparing a live demo. I presented, nerves high, and hit enter to run the system. The light flipped green, results perfect. My heart soared. But before the client could clap, Thomas stepped up, slung an arm over my shoulder, and smiled. "See, that's why NextCore is different. Margaret is a genius, but she's better suited to the back room. My job is to bring this achievement into the spotlight." I forced a smile, but inside it felt like a bucket of cold water. His words shut a door in my face. I belonged in the back. The spotlight was his. After those presentations, I often sat quietly in the car, watching Seattle's streetlights blur by, my heart heavy. The old 50-50 promise had faded. I tried to push back. In one meeting, I stood and said plainly, "This technology is the result of months of research. I think we need to explain it accurately, not oversimplify it." Thomas glanced at me, then turned to the board. "Margaret sometimes gets lost in the technical weeds. It's because she's passionate. My job is to keep things clear for customers." They nodded. A few smiled at him with sympathy, like he was a patient husband enduring a wife too absorbed. I felt my heart crack. The shift didn't stop at work. At home, Thomas started dismissing me. Before, we hashed out every big decision for hours. Now he just said, "I've decided. You don't need to worry." One day, I asked about the company's new direction, and he snapped, "Margaret, just do your technical part. Strategy is my job." I was stunned. The "we're 50-50 promise lived only in memory. Reality had become, "I speak, you execute." Over time, the board began to see Thomas as the face of the company. They called him the Pathfinder, and I was introduced as the woman behind the screen. Every time I heard it, my chest tightened. I didn't crave the spotlight, but I needed fairness. Our relationship frayed by the day. Dinner, once when we talked about work and dreams, turned into silence. He stared at his phone, texting someone I didn't know. When I asked, he said, "Clients, partners, urgent stuff." I wanted to believe him, like I had for decades. But deep down, I knew the seed of betrayal had sprouted. When I looked back on our youth, I remembered the old apartment, the sound of rain at the window, the moment Thomas took my hand and swore we'd be 50-50 in everything. That look was gone now. In its place stood a man who craved applause, loved the spotlight, and slowly treated me like a shadow. I had been his other half, co-founder, confidant. Now I was just the backroom tech. The bitterest truth was that the husband I trusted absolutely was the one who pushed me out of the light. I remember clearly the day Vanessa appeared at NextCore. It was an April morning while I was reviewing resumes for an executive assistant. Among the bland applications, hers stood out like a gilded card: an MBA from a prestigious California university, experience at 2 major tech firms, and a strong record with international clients. I was the one who signed off and pushed her into the final round. I believed the company needed someone energetic, great at communication, to support Thomas with partner meetings. Back then, I simply thought she would ease the load for both of us. I didn't expect that my own decision would open the door for a storm to blow into my life. On her first day at the company, Vanessa brought a box of pastries and set it in the middle of the employee break room. She beamed, called everyone by name, even folks who'd only been there a few months. I still remember her coming up to me, placing a small pastry on my desk, and saying, "Mrs. Hill, I've heard so much about you. It's an honor to work with you." I smiled back. Inside, I felt a bit warmed. For years, hardly anyone showed me small kindnesses like that. I believed Vanessa was a good person and could help NextCore. In the first months, Vanessa worked so hard it surprised everyone. She remembered every employee's birthday, prepared little cards, and sometimes even organized surprise pastry parties. She knew how to lift morale and make the company feel like a family. It didn't take long for Vanessa to become Thomas's right hand. For every client meeting, she arranged everything from seating and materials to snacks. She traveled with Thomas on business trips, stood beside him during presentations, and took meticulous notes. I saw the growing chemistry between them. At first I told myself it was just work, but then the overtime started cropping up. Thomas often called home saying, "I have to stay at the office. Vanessa and I still have a lot to finish." At first, I believed him. But when it happened nearly every night, my trust began to shake. I remember one time, it was close to midnight when Thomas finally came home. His shirt smelled strongly of a sweet perfume I'd never smelled before. When I gently asked, "You're working late, are you okay?" he snapped, "Margaret, don't be so suspicious. You always worry for no reason. You know, sometimes you're not stable." "You wear me out." I went silent. In 40 years, Thomas had never spoken to me like that. His blame felt like a knife. I could only stay quiet, swallowing my hurt in the dark. From then on, the distance between us grew. In the mornings, we hardly talked. At night, he often claimed urgent meetings or demanding clients. I realized our dinner table now had just me, staring at the empty chair across from me. At the company, I began to feel like an outsider. Younger employees ran to report to Vanessa more than to me. For important meetings, Thomas sat with her to discuss, and I was only called in to sign off on technical matters. They treated me like a quiet workhorse, while the spotlight and praise went entirely to Thomas and Vanessa. Sometimes I looked at Vanessa and saw her smile when someone called Thomas the soul of NextCore. That smile felt like a pinprick to my chest. I remembered when Thomas used to call me his indispensable other half. Now, our marital trust had been smoothly and cruelly replaced by Vanessa. I started to ask myself, did I hand Thomas the keys to destroy our marriage the day I signed Vanessa's hiring paperwork? That night, a light rain fell and wind from the Seattle Bay stirred the bedroom curtains. I sat at the desk, the warm lamplight on my thin hands as I reviewed the monthly financial report. Thomas said he'd be late because of an out-of-town client meeting. I was used to nights like that. Urgent calls, unscheduled trips, and those short texts. "I'm busy. Go to sleep." But that night, something kept me from turning off the light or going to bed. A vague intuition slipped into my heart. When Thomas came home, it was close to 1 a.m. I heard the car engine outside. I walked to the living room, pretending to fold blankets. He opened the door, his shirt wrinkled, collar slightly open, and what stunned me was that familiar sweet perfume, the very scent Vanessa wore. I said nothing and just looked at him. Thomas avoided my eyes and quickly set his briefcase on a chair. "I'm tired, don't start," he said, then headed straight to the bathroom. An hour later, when he was asleep, I went to that briefcase. I'm not a nosy woman, but my gut told me something was waiting inside. I opened his phone. His passcode was still the 4 digits of my birthday. He didn't think I'd check, maybe because he believed I was too gentle to doubt him. Then I saw the message. A short line, but it felt like a cold blade straight to my chest. "Tonight was a dream. I'm waiting for you." The message was from Vanessa Clark. Below it were rows of bright red heart emojis. I sat frozen as the screen blurred before my eyes. I read it over and over, my hands shaking. Every character, every punctuation mark was another cut. I didn't scream, didn't throw the phone, didn't wake him to confront him. I simply turned off the screen, put everything back exactly where it was, and stepped out onto the balcony. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside me was a storm with no end. For days afterward, I moved through a daze. I went to the office and watched them standing together in the hallway, Vanessa smiling, holding a stack of files, Thomas resting his hand on her shoulder to point out something. The gesture was intimate enough that anyone could see it. I told myself maybe I misunderstood, that it was just workplace closeness. But then, while reviewing company expenses, I found strange payments. Luxury hotel bills in Portland, Denver, Napa Valley, all labeled client meetings. The odd part was those clients didn't exist. Quietly, I copied all the statements and saved them in a separate file on my personal computer. A cold feeling spread through me as the pieces of truth locked into place. Then, on a Monday morning, while checking internal emails, I accidentally saw a misdirected message. It was addressed to Thomas, but because the system still had me in an old permission group, a copy landed in my inbox. The subject line was short: "The weekend cabin will be ours." I opened it. Vanessa had written, "I set everything up. Just come, and I'll cook your favorite dinner. No one can bother us." I read each word slowly. My chest tightened. The weekend cabin, the place Thomas and I used to visit on our anniversaries, where he once said it was just for the two of us. Now it was their nest. I couldn't breathe. I stood up, went to the bathroom, and looked at my face in the mirror. A 66-year-old woman with tired eyes and silvering hair. I saw pain there and awakening. I knew if I exploded, everything would blow up, but anger would only make me lose control. I couldn't lose like that. I had to let them stab themselves with the very blade they forged. I began quietly gathering evidence. Every email, bill, and text was copied and saved in a folder encrypted with technology I built for NextCore. Then one day, luck smiled, or maybe fate took my side. A young IT staffer, Kenny, came to me looking uneasy. "Mrs. Hill, I think you should see this." He set a small USB drive in front of me. I found a file flagged hidden in the camera system. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I respect you. I opened the USB in my private office. The screen showed grainy footage from the building's elevator camera. Thomas and Vanessa, embracing and kissing under dim yellow light, totally unaware of the hidden camera in the corner. I sat motionless. No more tears, no more trembling. Just a cold emptiness. Maybe the most painful thing isn't the betrayal itself, but having to smile as if you don't know. I wondered, Have you ever had to stay silent like that just to keep your self-respect? If this story touches you, leave a few words in the comments. I read every single one. I captured each frame and saved them with the texts, emails, and statements, everything compiled into a secret file named Project V. In my head, I heard my own words from years ago. We're 50-50 in life and in work. Now I understood. I was the half he cut off when I was no longer useful. That evening, when Thomas came home, I still cooked dinner like usual. I didn't ask, didn't accuse, didn't look at him for too long. I wanted him to believe I knew nothing. I listened to him talk about a long, exhausting meeting, smiled, and poured him more wine. Inside, I felt a chilling calm. That night, I lay beside him, listening to the steady breathing of the man who once meant the whole world to me. I realized my love for him had died. Only duty and habit remained. But underneath that quiet, a different fire was growing, the fire of resistance. I swore they would never guess that the woman they saw as weak would be the one to bring it all down. I didn't need to scream, didn't need a dramatic scene, didn't need tears. I needed a plan. And that plan began that very night when I reopened my laptop and looked at the old code security routines only I understood, only I had the right to touch. They think I'm weak, I whispered to myself. But this time their betrayal will turn back on them. Outside, the city was deep in night. Lights shimmered on the quiet lake, reflecting my own soul, a woman who gave her life to love and work, now standing at the fork in the road of defiance. And deep down I knew, when morning came, I wouldn't be the Margaret of yesterday anymore. After the night I gathered enough proof of betrayal, my heart turned to ice. I didn't break down like a cheated wife. Instead, a quiet strength rose in me. I understood. I couldn't beat them with tears, and certainly not with pleading. I could only win with what I created: code. From that day, I quietly built what I called insurance code. In every line of NextCore's system, I embedded an invisible signature, a mark of authorship, like my secret signature. It didn't affect operations, no one but me could spot it, but it proved one thing: I was the one who wrote this system's soul. Every night I stayed late at the office. The glass walls reflected my silhouette in the empty room. My fingers tapped steadily, each keystroke like a heartbeat. I created escape hatches, hidden back doors only I knew how to disable. If I was ever pushed out completely, a few keystrokes could halt the system, and only I could restore it. I didn't do it to destroy, but to protect myself. In tech, power doesn't lie in a CEO title or on-stage speeches. Real power lives in the code, where everything lives or dies with one press of enter. And on that battlefield, I knew I was still unbeatable. I remember the night I finished the first block of insurance code. Rain pattered outside, fogging the window. I wiped tears with the back of my hand and stared at the black screen glowing with green lines. A mix of pain and pride rose in me. Pain from my husband's betrayal and being pushed from my rightful place. Pride because I still had the strength to hold on to my life's work. But I didn't stop there. I started logging every commit, every change and update to my name. I stored careful backups with timestamps, clear proof that I built the foundation. I knew that one day, when Thomas and Vanessa tried to erase me, I'd have a vault of evidence to fight back. At the same time, I quietly investigated finances. With a seasoned eye, I spotted shady expenses. A subsidiary set up in Delaware, a strange name, getting regular cash from NextCore. I followed the trail and found it was a shell company where Thomas and Vanessa could siphon money unnoticed. I printed every transaction and filed them neatly into a second binder labeled Black Finance. I reached out to an old lawyer, Mr. Peterson, who helped us file the original incorporation 40 years ago. When he reviewed the new records, he frowned and flipped back and forth. "Margaret, your name is gone from the list of co-founders." In the original, your signature is right here, but in a recent edited version, it's only Thomas Hill. Someone altered the documents. My blood boiled. It wasn't just betrayal in love, it was betrayal in law and truth. They wanted to erase me as if I never existed. I left the lawyer's office and walked through crowded streets with a hollow heart. Whenever I thought about being humiliated like that, I cried. But I cried in silence. I refused to scream or complain to anyone. At night, when Boston slept, I sat at the screen, fingers flying, tears hitting the keyboard. It felt like every line of code was my own blood. Some nights, I couldn't tell the rain outside from the sobs caught in my throat, but I kept going. I added more layers of insurance, more hidden notes, more back doors. NextCore became a city of secret tunnels, and I alone held the map. One morning, I watched Thomas head to work in a crisp suit, Vanessa glued to his side with a stack of documents. They walked fast, laughing like they owned NextCore. I stood at the 10th floor window looking down and thought, "Go on, soak in the glory. You have no idea each step you take is on a minefield I planted." There were moments of weakness when I wanted to charge in, throw the file right in Thomas's face, and scream that I knew everything. But I held back. I understood that the moment I showed my hand, they'd try to wipe me out. If I stayed silent, I was the shadow in the corners, a threat they'd never see coming. I lived two parallel lives. By day, I was Margaret, the gentle, quiet, soft-spoken co-founder. By night, I was a different Margaret, the betrayed wife, the coder setting traps, the silent fighter. Every keystroke, every new line of code was a blade I was sharpening for the day of reckoning. Once, staring at my fingers trembling from fatigue, I asked myself, at 66, I should be resting, enjoying peace with grandkids. Why am I still wrestling with these cold lines of code? Then I knew the answer. Because I refuse to be buried. I won't let anyone erase 40 years of my life like deleting a file on a computer. On the final night before finishing the entire insurance system, I typed the last command and leaned back in my chair. On the screen, the words blinked. Execution completed. I closed my eyes and heard my heart pounding. I knew that from that moment, I'd taken my power back. I was no longer the abandoned, weak wife. I was Margaret Hill, the creator of NextCore's brain, the only person with the key to open and lock its doors, and I swore I'd use the very tech I built to strike back. Not with knives, not with shouting, but with cold numbers and lines of code soulless yet strong enough to bring down an empire. Rumors began to seep through the company quietly, like thin smoke winding through the halls. At first it was just whispers behind my back, hesitant comments over coffee. Then it spread, turning into a widely accepted truth people nodded along to. Margaret Hill isn't mentally stable anymore. Vanessa planted the seeds. I knew that. She was slick, never said it outright, just dropped a few careful hints. Some nights I saw Mrs. Hill sitting alone in the office till morning, eyes red. It's really worrying. Or, she seems to think she's still the soul of the company. I feel bad, but I'm afraid she's living in the past. Words like that, dripping bit by bit, soaked into people's ears. Repeat them enough, and folks start believing. One morning, I walked into the break room. The group of younger employees went silent when they saw me, eyes sliding away. A few stood up quickly and left with flimsy excuses. I sat down and poured a cup of coffee, but the bitterness that day was hard to swallow. I realized I didn't belong there anymore. At lunch, co-workers who used to invite me out now quietly went without asking. Some even drifted away when I approached. Friendships I'd built over years dissolved, as if an invisible line had been drawn to keep me on the other side. I tried calling Linda a close friend from the early days. She picked up, voice uneasy. "Margaret, I'm really sorry, but I can't take your side now. You know, times have changed." Then she hung up quickly, leaving me standing frozen in my living room. I understood. Vanessa and Thomas had succeeded in pushing me to the margins. The boardroom was worse. Before, when I spoke, they listened. Now, during meetings, the moment I opened my mouth, their eyes went straight to Thomas or Vanessa. No matter what I said, it felt like a draft of air. Once, I presented a detailed report on a potential security flaw. I laid it out clearly, backed with data. When I finished, the room was silent. Thomas smirked and said, "Thanks, Margaret, but I don't think it's as serious as she's making it. We should focus on the market expansion strategy." Everyone immediately nodded and turned to discuss with him, ignoring my warnings. I sat there, hands shaking with anger, and no one cared. I started recording everything: board meetings, hallway whispers. I saved every audio clip, every email, every detail. I knew that one day, this would be my weapon to flip the table. But in the middle of it all, I had to face a hard truth. I'd been completely isolated. In the very company I built from nothing, I'd become a ghost. I walked the halls and people looked at me like a stranger, or worse, like someone unhinged. Some nights I came home, dropped my bag on a chair, and sat in the dark for hours. Loneliness filled the room. After 40 years with Thomas, all I had left was my own shadow. But instead of collapsing, another fire rose in me. I told myself, they built a wall around me to trap me, to block my voice. But they don't know I'm digging a tunnel right under their feet. Every night, when Boston went quiet, I sat at my computer, the blue screen reflecting a face lined with age. Tears fell sometimes, but my hands kept typing. I was no longer just a betrayed wife or a sidelined co-founder. I was a survivor, preparing for the counterstrike. That day would come, I was sure of it. And when it did, the wall they built around me would crash down under the roar of everything they had dismissed. That morning, Boston's sky was slate gray, drizzle clinging to the office windows. I arrived earlier than usual with a black coffee and a stack of documents. The building felt different, colder, so quiet I could hear my heels echo down the hall. At exactly 9 a.m., the intercom rang. Linda's voice, now Vanessa's private assistant, came through, flat and emotionless. "Mrs. Hill, the CEO requests your presence in the main conference room, right now." I knew. My heart knew why, even as my mind tried to stay calm. This had been set up for a long time. The rain outside felt like a signal for the last act of a play where I was the discarded character. I straightened my coat and stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb to 15, the floor I once saw as the pinnacle of my career, now just an execution ground. When the doors opened, Vanessa's familiar perfume flooded in the same scent I'd smelled on Thomas's shirt so many nights. The conference room was bright and cold. At the long oak table sat 3 people: Thomas, Vanessa, and Mr. Keller from HR. No one offered me a seat. Thomas looked up, his voice dry and mechanical. "Margaret, thanks for coming. We have a few things to inform you." Vanessa flipped through a folder, her voice light as air. "This is the board's official termination decision, effective immediately." I said nothing. I just looked at the thick paper, the bold lines like knife cuts. Reason: failure to cooperate with the executive team, creating a hostile work environment, damaging team morale. I let out a small laugh. Neat work, the charges crafted carefully enough to sound almost convincing. But when I looked deep into Thomas's eyes, I saw something there, not anger, but fear. Maybe he was afraid I still knew too much. Vanessa was different. She smiled, sat up straight, eyes gleaming with triumph. Every time I glanced over, she stroked her glossy brown hair, fingers brushing a gold necklace I knew Thomas had bought. Each gesture said, "I won." Thomas folded his hands, trying to keep his voice steady. "Margaret, don't make this harder. We'll wire your severance. Think of this as time to rest and enjoy your later years." I narrowed my eyes and asked slowly, How long have you two been sleeping together?" The room froze. Vanessa stiffened, lips tight, face paling. Thomas looked at me, his face flushing. He slammed his hand on the table. "Stop being delusional. You're degrading yourself, Margaret." I leaned back, a thin smile on my lips. "Delusional? I just want a number. 3 months? Or 6? Thomas turned away in silence. Vanessa lowered her gaze to tidy her papers, her voice shaking slightly but trying to sound composed. "I don't think this meeting needs to go on. The decision is signed. HR will guide you through the handover." I looked at her, my eyes cold as a blade. "Be careful with the dream you think you're holding, Vanessa. Some things only show you the abyss once you've grabbed them." She didn't answer, just gave a small smile. The smile of a victor. Thomas stood, went to a cabinet, pulled out an old laptop and tossed it lightly toward me. "Take it, Margaret. It's your old machine. I think you'll need it to write your memoirs." A couple of awkward laughs slipped from the other two. I looked at the machine's scuffed shell, worn-off keys, but inside it held everything they never understood. The insurance code. With a small command, that alone could bring their empire down. I took the laptop with both hands, holding it like something sacred. I looked up at Thomas, voice steady. "Thank you. I will, in fact, need this." He raised an eyebrow, not catching the meaning. Vanessa smiled lightly. "It's good you can take this so gracefully. I'll arrange someone to help you pack." "No need," I said. "Everything that belongs to me, I've carried it in my head for a long time." I turned and walked slowly toward the door. But as my hand touched the handle, Thomas's voice came from behind. "Margaret, consider this final. Don't try to come back." I stopped, turned, and looked him dead in the eye. "You're right. It is final, but not because you say so." Vanessa frowned slightly. Thomas stood frozen, his gaze wavering for a second before sliding away. I opened the door and left the room. But their script wasn't done. In the hall, 2 security guards were waiting. One stepped forward, voice cold. "Sorry, Mrs. Hill. We've been instructed to escort you out of the building." I looked at them. No anger, no resistance. I just said softly, "I can walk on my own." They still trailed close behind, as if I might steal something. At the lobby, one held the door, his tone curt. "Please leave company premises." I stepped out. The heavy glass door closed behind me with a dry thud like a lock on fate. The rain was heavier. I stood at the entrance to NextCore, the place where I'd laid the first brick, sketched the first logo, celebrated the first contract. Now I was thrown out of the very home I built, like a stranger. I looked up at the 15th floor. Through the fogged glass, Vanessa's silhouette was clear, her hand on Thomas's shoulder. They were laughing. I pressed my lips together and gripped the laptop. My hands were ice cold, but heat surged in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't need to, because I knew that in just 10 minutes, the code I'd planted on this machine would start, not to destroy, but to restore balance. In 10 minutes, they'd learn what it means to wake the beast they thought they had tamed. I turned and walked into the rain. Cold drops stung my face, soaked my silver hair, and seeped into my collar. I didn't open an umbrella. I let myself be drenched, let the chill sink to the bone. On the sidewalk, I stopped and looked back one last time. The bold letters NextCore Technologies loomed, catching the light. I spoke softly, almost only for myself. "You took everything, but you forgot. NextCore's soul is still me." I opened the laptop under the awning, the screen glowing in the rain. My hand trembled slightly as I typed a few characters. The command line appeared. "System authenticated. Countdown initiated." I smiled. A calm smile, no hate, no bitterness, just balance returning to what was stolen. The rain kept falling. Under the gray sky, I quietly closed the laptop, slipped it into my bag, and walked away. Behind me, the empire they were so proud of was about to start shaking. I was still sitting on the cold stone steps, hugging the laptop, when the phone in my pocket buzzed. I pulled it out, the screen lit with a familiar line, Protocol Omega, activated. Below it, a red countdown, 10 minutes, 0 seconds. I took a deep breath and lifted my eyes to the towering glass building. NextCore, my brainchild, was humming like a giant machine, but in just minutes, it would start to falter, like a heart out of rhythm. And only I knew why. 9 minutes. I sat still, listening to the rain tapping on the metal rail. Inside, employees began to frown. Through the glass, I saw a few jump up from their chairs. Their screens flickered, systems slowed, cursors spinning endlessly. Complaints rippled across the rows. What's going on? Why are the servers so slow? 7 minutes. I saw an IT engineer sprint into the hall, phone glued to his ear. 5 minutes. Right on schedule, the customer portal went down. All transactions froze, thousands of sessions stuck. Customer service lines shrieked, internal alarms blared across the office. 3 minutes. A critical alert flashed across the global monitoring dashboard, critical error detected. And then, just as I predicted, the worst hit. International hackers spotted the hole. From everywhere, Russia, China, Eastern Europe, streams of IPs charged in like wolves smelling blood. They didn't care who NextCore was. They saw a fortress, once untouchable, now cracking. In minutes, hundreds of attacks erupted at once. The firewall buckled, red alerts flooded the system, and customer data jammed tight. I can picture the scene inside right now. A once quiet office turning chaotic, chairs scraping, keyboards pounding, phones ringing off the hook, employees rushing around, sweating through their shirts. Thomas is surely pale as a sheet. The man who used to stand under the lights bragging about impenetrable tech is now frozen in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. Vanessa, who was so sure she had all the power, is probably staggering, lips trembling, that smug smile gone. Shouts must be echoing across the floors. The servers are down. We've lost control. Customer data isn't responding. Someone has definitely called PR, but how can they hide it when the press has already sniffed it out? In minutes, the major outlets start running red banners. Top cybersecurity firm NextCore suffers massive hack. Those words cut like a fatal blow. A company built on the promise of safety now exposed to the public like a sandcastle washed away in the rain. I stood up, a little shaky, not from fear, but from a mix of pain, anger, and relief. I looked up at the 15th floor, where the CEO's office lights blazed. The glass reflected panicked shadows moving back and forth. The rain poured harder, plastering my hair to my head, weighing down my Brad coat. I didn't wipe it away. I didn't run. I just stood there, holding the laptop, eyes locked on the building. A small smile slipped from my lips. Not the smile of total victory, but the smile of a woman who finally got her voice back after being trampled. They threw me out like trash. But 10 minutes later, those same people watched their empire fall apart right in front of them. Rain, mixed with tears on my cheeks, no one could tell the difference. I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. This is only the beginning." The news spread faster than I expected. Within 2 hours of the NextCore outage, my phone was buzzing nonstop with alerts. American media, from local papers to top financial outlets, blasted headlines. Major cybersecurity firm hacked, NextCore systems in free fall amid global attack. A few sites added sharp commentary. If NextCore can't even protect itself, how can it protect anyone else? I sat in a small cafe on Tremont Street, sipping hot tea, watching quietly. On the wall-mounted TV, a live broadcast showed NextCore's stock chart. The red line plunged like a runaway train. Every minute, tens of millions in market cap vanished. Around me, people murmured. Most had no idea I was Margaret Hill, the co-founder kicked out just days ago. By noon, the market recorded it. Nextcore's stock had dropped more than 60% in just a few hours. A wave of sell orders flooded in. Investors had zero patience left. Nextcore's phones were surely melting down. Major clients, banks, and financial groups that once trusted our tech pulled contracts en masse. They didn't need to wait for an investigation. For them, trust was already dead. And in cybersecurity, trust is the biggest asset. Once it's gone, nothing can save you. That afternoon, I got an anonymous message from a former employee. Mrs. Margaret, the FBI just showed up at HQ. They've sealed off the 15th floor to inspect the financial records and systems. The Securities Commission is involved too. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel joy or gloating, just a long, hollow emptiness. The empire I'd spent 40 years building was collapsing in an instant. But I knew I wasn't the one who destroyed it. Thomas and Vanessa paved the way with betrayal, arrogance, and blind greed. I only opened the door and let the truth in. 2 days later, social media exploded. The hashtag #Nextcore collapse hit #1 on Twitter. Videos of employees shouting in the office, alarms blaring, leaked emails from furious clients, everything spread at lightning speed. People made memes, jokes, and mocked a name that used to mean security. Vanessa disappeared from every platform. Her LinkedIn and Instagram were wiped clean. Not a trace. Rumor had it she'd flown to Europe to dodge the backlash. Some sniped. Nextcore's power queen turned fugitive overnight. And Thomas? I saw him on TV a few days later. A gaunt man with dark circles under his eyes, messy silver hair, walking out of Nextcore's HQ, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Reporters swarmed, flashes popping. He wasn't a commanding CEO anymore, just a wrecked, beaten figure. The board had to announce his removal on the spot. People asked me later, "Margaret, did you feel happy watching him lose everything?" I just shook my head. Happy? No, but fair, yes. He chose betrayal, and this was the price. As for me, I didn't sit and watch the ruins smolder. While Nextcore was in free fall, I quietly met with a few former clients, the ones who believed in me, not the glossy Nextcore brand. I told them plainly, the real tech was still here, still working, and I was the one who built it. They listened and nodded. A few weeks later, I signed my first consulting contract under a new name, Secure Shield Solutions. A small rented office in Cambridge, just a few desks, a whiteboard, and 3 young employees. But in their eyes, I saw a bright trust I hadn't felt at Nextcore in years. On the day I signed that contract, Boston was drizzled in rain again. I stood by the window, looking out at the wet street, remembering the day I was thrown out of Nextcore, clutching my laptop. A moment that felt like an ending, but was really a beginning. Secure Shield Solutions, humble as it sounded, was my declaration. I didn't need a multi-million-dollar empire to prove my worth. I needed a place where justice belonged to the truth, where intellect and loyalty weren't betrayed. I put my hand on the whiteboard and wrote in big blue letters, not power, not money, trust. I knew my journey was entering a new chapter, and this time, I wouldn't be anyone's shadow. I was Margaret Hill, the woman who walked tall out of the ashes. That night, I just finished a long day with the young engineers at Secure Shield Solutions when I heard a knock. It was shaky, repeating, the kind of knock from someone exhausted, tapping with trembling fingers more than firm knuckles. I stepped onto the porch, opened the door, and there was Thomas. The man who once strode across stages in $3,000 suits was now a wreck. Wrinkled shirt, stained spots, hollow eyes, wild silver hair like it hadn't seen a comb in days. He'd lost weight, gaunt, sagging like a beggar. "Margaret," he whispered, voice breaking. "Please give me 5 minutes." I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe. I didn't invite him in. The Boston night wind was cold, but I stood steady. "What are you doing here?" I asked, calm. Thomas swallowed, eyes red. "The company. It's dying." I can't bring it back. Investors pulled out, clients are gone. Nextcore has only 12 loyal employees left, but they don't trust me anymore. Margaret, please come back. I let out a small laugh, not bitter anymore, but the laugh of someone who'd seen the truth long ago. What do you want from me? I'm not your employee to order around. He took a breath and pulled a stack of papers from his pocket with shaking hands. He set it on the step in front of me. 48% equity, full authority over engineering. I'll sign right here. If you come back, Nextcore still has a chance. I looked down at the documents. He'd actually prepared them. Legal terms, draft signatures from his lawyer. Thomas was ready to give up power, the same thing he once ripped from me. I was quiet for a long moment, then lifted my head, eyes sharp as a blade. Do you know my conditions? He trembled. Name them. I must be recognized as the sole architect of the Nextcore system. All documents, statements, press, and client materials must name me. Don't call it a team effort, and definitely don't call it your achievement. He nodded immediately, almost frantic. And one more thing, I said, voice like ice. Vanessa will never set foot in Nextcore again. Not as an employee, not as a consultant, not as a friend of the company. Thomas pressed his lips together, hesitated, then saw my eyes, and knew there was no room to bargain. He took the pen and signed each clause, letter by letter, like a man sealing a coffin on his past. I took the papers, flipped through to confirm everything was in order, then nodded slightly. Good. I'll come back. But remember, I'm not returning to save you. I'm returning to save the technology, to protect the people who still deserve it. Thomas lowered his head, like he'd just heard a sentence. When I walked into Nextcore HQ again, the office was a ghost of itself. Empty rows of desks, dark screens, rolling chairs with no one in them, more than half the floor abandoned. No lively typing, no loud meetings, just 12 familiar, tired faces waiting for me in a small conference room. Sarah, a veteran coder, stepped forward first. We knew you'd come back. We're here for you, not for Thomas. I looked around. In their eyes, I saw a blend of despair and hope. They know. I no longer trusted the old system, but they still trusted my hands, and I knew that if I had even a small chance, I'd pull them out of the pit. I didn't waste time on speeches. I opened my laptop and projected the full system map, every weak point I'd quietly built in, now the key to patching it all. We start now, one hole at a time. I'll lead you through sealing each one. From that day, I dove in like I was 20 again, back on the floor of that damp Seattle apartment. Long nights with those 12 people rewriting modules, rebuilding the security architecture, erecting new firewalls, and most of all, restoring trust. Thomas almost never showed. He kept to a small office, avoiding everyone's gaze. I stayed with the team, splitting cheap pizzas, drinking cold coffee, typing till morning. No one called me the woman behind the scenes anymore. I led. I was the iron hand rebuilding Nextcore from rubble. By week 3, the first miracle appeared. An old client, Pacific Financial, emailed me directly, not through Thomas. We heard you're back. If you're personally leading the engineering team, we're willing to reconsider a contract. I smiled. It was the first sign of the Margaret effect, what the press would later call it. Within a month, 3 major clients returned. They didn't trust Nextcore, but they trusted me. Every new contract was another hammer strike securing the shaky foundation. The press, which had been waiting for bankruptcy headlines, began to change its tone. The sidelined founder returns, bringing hope to save Nextcore. Inside the office, you could feel life coming back. Employees lifted their heads, that abandoned feeling faded. And me, every time I saw the system glow green on the dashboard, every time All Secure lit up, it felt like a piece of my 40 years was given back. One late night, Thomas walked into the server room where I was monitoring a stable system for the first time in months. He looked at the wash of green screens, then turned to me and said quietly, "You did it. You saved Nextcore." I met his eyes, calm. "I didn't save you, Thomas. I saved the technology I built. And I did it for the people who still deserve it. You just happen to still be here." He didn't answer, just turned and left. Inside me, there was no anger left, and no love either. Only one clear truth: I had won. Not by shouting or messy revenge, but by proving that skill and resolve can rebuild an empire from ashes. From that moment on, Nextcore was no longer Thomas's company. It was the proof of the Margaret effect. The storm passed. After months of relentless work, Nextcore slowly recovered. The metrics on the dashboards weren't burning red anymore, they turned green. Quarterly revenue climbed back. Old clients returned to sign again. And the twist no one expected: the company performed even better than before the collapse. The media called it a miraculous rebirth. But I knew there was no miracle. It was sweat, tears, and the stubborn resolve of me and the 12 who stayed. At the first board meeting after the crisis was contained, I walked in no longer the wife behind the scenes, but the chief architect, the company's backbone. The board members, those who had coldly voted to fire me, lowered their eyes, a mix of regret and respect. The board chair stood up, voice low. "We publicly acknowledge that Margaret Hill is the one who saved Nextcore from the brink of bankruptcy. Her role is indisputable. She is the backbone." I stayed silent, giving a slight nod. The recognition came late, but it was necessary. It couldn't erase the humiliation I'd endured, but it returned one truth to me: justice, at last, belonged to me. Thomas was still sitting there. He tried again and again to cut in, to claw back his old role, but every time he spoke, I shut him down with numbers, with evidence, with architecture only I could explain. Faced with my cold, precise arguments, he went quiet. Once, after a meeting, he stopped in the hallway, voice choked. "Margaret, you're the smartest woman I've ever known." I looked straight into his eyes. In them, I saw a flicker of the man I once loved, the man who sat beside me eating instant noodles in a cheap rental. But that memory was ash now. I gave a faint smile. "Maybe, but you realized it far too late. Our love had died long ago. What remained was an empty marriage certificate form over substance." I didn't hold a grudge anymore, but there was nothing left to forgive. On the day Nextcore held its rebirth celebration, the hall was packed. Bright lights, a huge backdrop reading, "Stronger than ever." I stepped onto the stage to a wave of applause that seemed to roll on, and on that stage I stood alone. No Thomas at my side, no one left to dim my light. I looked down at the rows of faces, people who had doubted me, turned their backs, now listening closely. I drew a deep breath and spoke clearly. "Never underestimate the woman who built the kingdom." The room went still for a beat, then erupted in applause. I didn't need to say more. That one line said everything. That night I went home. I sat by the window, watching Boston's lights shimmer across the city. I thought about 40 years, white nights writing code, quiet tears, brutal betrayals, and the final smiles when justice came back. I knew this journey wasn't only about saving a company. It left a legacy for those who'd come after, that women, at any age, have the right to stand up, take back their voice, and claim their true worth. I lifted my head, feeling light. I was free. I was strong. And I had left a mark on this life that can't be erased. My story closes here, but its echo will linger. I want to sit and listen to you, the one following along. Where are you watching from? And which moment touched your heart the most? Leave a comment and share a few words. Your voice reminds me I'm not alone. If this story gave you even a little hope, please subscribe, hit like, and keep walking with me. I am truly grateful, not just for listening, but for helping me prove one thing: justice always finds its way back, and a woman's strength never fades.